Hello everyone, this is Toby from the International Association for Political Science Students. We are here again from San Francisco at the annual convention of the International Studies Association. And I'm really happy to have next to me here Kathryn Sikkink. Kathryn Sikkink is probably very familiar to most of you due to her work on the norm life cycle and international norms in general. This year at ISA, you had a conference, a roundtable on an evaluation of the norm life cycle, 20 years. What was it about?
Okay, so this is an article that I published with Martha Finnemore in 1998, and it was an article that was part of the journal International Organization was celebrating its 50th year of publication. And so they commissioned a series of articles by scholars around specific topics where they asked us to talk about kind of the whole history of a concept. And so we were asked to talk about the issue of norms. And we went back and reread the Journal International Organization. We thought about how scholars had talked about these issues over many years. And then we also tried to contribute some of our original arguments about the nature of norms. And one part of that article was this idea that norms travel through a life cycle in the sense that they emerge. They emerge through slowly through norm entrepreneurship, and that some norms, they reach a point where they catch on, that there's a tipping point, and there's a lot of acceptance around those norms. So that article gained a lot of attention because it was useful for people working on a really wide variety of different issues to think about norm change in those issues.
And has there been a change in how you view the norm cycle over these last 20 years? Has there been a change of perspective when you look on your work back then and right now?
So one of the things I said at the beginning of the panel was I both continue to use parts of that research, that article, for work I do almost every day. So I was just at a conference on technological change, and I talked about how we need to build new norms around technology issues and privacy, especially after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. At the same time, I said I'm still really dissatisfied with questions we can't answer in international relations. And so I feel like we have a long ways to go still in norms research to begin to answer those questions. And the examples I gave were, so we have very recent examples in this country of events that look like perhaps the beginning of what I call a norms cascade. And one of them is the Me Too movement, right? So all of a sudden this issue of sexual violence and sexual harassment, which has been on the it's been apparent and discussed for many, many years in this country, but all of a sudden, very recently, we've had this explosion of personal testimony by women talking about their own personal experience around sexual harassment or violence. So my question as a norm scholar say, well, is that explosion of personal testimony an indication that we may have the beginning of a norm cascade of changes in policy and behavior in that area?
How do you explain it? Is that also due to the fact that we have kind of a transformation of what you call the entrepreneur? Is there like new forms of entrepreneurship, or what is the reason behind this?
Well, so that's exactly that was the critique I made. I said, on one hand, the terms we use, like a norm cascade, maybe, or norms entrepreneurs, may be useful, but one of the problems is we still don't really know why is it that some issues take off at some point. Why this issue and not another? Why now and not 5 years ago? Another very current example, what about the Parkland students and the activism around gun control that we see after the shootings in Parkland School? Right? So once again, it's an issue been around for a long time, has stalled apparently. There's just we've been able to get no action on gun control. And then all of a sudden, this group of students kind of picks it up, brings to national attention, and we ask, is there finally going to be new developments in gun control in this country?
Mm-hmm.
But we can't explain why it is that these Parkland students are being norm entrepreneurs right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why now and not earlier? There's been school shootings earlier. In those other schools, we didn't see students step forward and really become national norm entrepreneurs around the issue of gun control.
Mm-hmm. Are there any alternative explanations to that, or things that that were raised in this discussion as well?
Yeah. So one issue has to do with the new context we're in, and that's the context of Trump's America. Mm-hmm. Right? And so norms entrepreneurs, we've always known that the political context that where these norm debates happen, it's not like a new norm enters an empty normative landscape, mm-hmm. right? The normative landscape is always very dense and full with existing norms. But the context matters. And so here we have a context where, let's say around issues of sexual violence and harassment, it's possible that many, many women were deeply angered by the fact that even though there was revelations during the campaign mm-hmm. of sexual harassment, at least, that didn't seem to make any difference for the way many people voted. 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. And so it could be that context, that new context, really somehow pushed women into this, like I say, this explosion of personal testimony in a way that hadn't happened earlier.
Mm-hmm. Is this research also related to your book? Because you said that you were just publishing a book on hope. How does it relate to what you've done before?
So my new book is called Evidence for Hope, Making Human Rights Work in the 21st Century. So in addition to being a scholar of norms, I work a lot on human rights, international human rights mainly. We've been talking about domestic issues right now, but I'm an IR scholar. And so there have been a lot of attacks about the legitimacy and the effectiveness of human rights law, mm-hmm. institutions, and movements. I decided that I wanted to write a book that was really a response to some of those attacks, some of that critique, the pessimism. There's intense pessimism mm-hmm. in the world today about human rights. And some of that pessimism is very understandable, but some of it takes form of saying that everything in the world today is worse than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. Okay? I mean, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, speaking in 2016, said there's never been so much suffering in the world since the formation of the United Nations as there is today. Mm-hmm. And so as a scholar, I felt like I should go and gather information, trying to say every way that we can measure human rights, violations or human rights progress. I gathered all the possible data. And what I found is that it's really hard to support the idea that there's no progress in human rights. There's actually, in the world for decades, there's been tremendous increases, whether it be in life expectancy, decline in infant mortality, the decline in use of the death penalty, decline in genocide and politicide, mm-hmm. dramatic increases in women's education. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so I made an argument saying we need to use this evidence in order to sustain hope, because hope is really important for people to have the energy to be able to initiate these kinds of norm campaigns. Right? Mm-hmm. So in other words, these norm campaigns, Me Too, or the Parkland students, it's important you need to have anger, and they have anger, mm-hmm. right? But you also need to have hope that if you organize, you could make a difference. And mm-hmm. you can gain hope from looking at the history of these past campaigns and see the difference that they've made.
Mm-hmm. Do you still see a difference between these single issues and single movements on the one hand, and on the other hand, I think what you have called before the development of democracy, for example, being on a certain plateau where it does not move any farther, or where it got stuck at a certain point?
Mm-hmm. So democracy in the world. Okay, there was in the 1980s, in particular, 90s, we had the third wave of democracy. Started in the 70s, 80s, the third wave of democracy. So a dramatic increase in the number of democracies in the world. And so for the first time, we have the number of democracies across and increase over the number of autocracies in the world. But by the by the early 21st century, that increase in democracy starts to level off, and even starts, depending on what measure you use, it starts to decline. And so there is a lot of worry that there's going to be a reversal of some of these trends.
Is globalization also a factor that adds this not confusion, but which makes it more difficult actually to find out which norms will make it and which norms will not, because the sphere of actors involved, the sphere of influence just gets more diverse, let's say. Does that play into it?
Globalization just has diverse effects. Okay, so on one hand, I've worked on transnational advocacy networks, right? And so globalization has permitted more people from around the world to be in contact with one another. Right? And so it has spurred the formation of these global social movements. On the other hand, we know that globalization, some aspects of globalization have contributed to the backlash against globalization. So because globalization, if it's unfettered by policy tools, can lead to increased inequality. Right? We've seen that in the United States. We have more inequality in the United States than any time since the early 20th century. That is not an inevitable. That's not an inevitable result of globalization. Other countries in continental Europe and in Japan have not seen that same dramatic increase in inequality because they've used domestic social policy to mitigate it. Okay, but in for various reasons, the English-speaking countries of the world, so we see it in the U.S., in the UK, Canada, Australia, are all seeing this dramatic increase in inequality because there's been less willingness to use social policy to try to mitigate.
I can see from all what you're arguing that you also have a very strong normative relation to your work, or that you or that there is at least one side of you that also seeks to make a to bridge the gap kind of between also academic interest and certain normative frameworks that play a role for you. And we have a lot of young students at home who might also consider going into academia and might be interested in what the mindset of someone working for so long in academia can be.
Well, one right now, I work at the Harvard Kennedy School. Harvard Kennedy School is a school of public policy. And we're very committed to using academic research to give tools to people in the policy realm to bring about positive change in the world. So not all political science departments see that as their mission, but the place I work, Kennedy School, sees its mission is to use scholarship to bring about positive change in the world. So I very much agree with that goal. And so in my classes, that's the way we try to do. We don't think just like, what's the theory, what's the history? We say, how can we use this theory and how can we use this history to inform better policymaking, whether you're going to be in the government, whether you're going to be in an international organization, whether an NGO, all need to use the lessons from scholarship to inform their work.
All right.
Also, though, human rights itself, I mean, as a scholar of human rights, I am committed to certain normative positions, but they're not my personal normative positions. Like saying, I use as a basis for this normative position, international human rights law that's been drafted by all the countries of the world in very deliberative processes where there's a lot of consultation. And so if you wish, the ethics that I bring to it are not my personal ethics, they're the ethics that I take from global human rights treaties.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. We are very happy. Wish you all the best for this conference and for your current work.
Thank you very much.